Step on up, sit down, twist off that bottle top or crack open that can, and welcome to Porch Matters. This is Terry Cagle coming to you from my back porch. Yes, sir, yes, ma'am, the name of this show is authentic. On Porch Matters, our saying is this: big issues or just a friendly conversation. No topic is off limits. We take pride in being able to talk about anything with each other in an open discussion. Open discussion is one of the only ways to learn. Your perspective could be changed. You could change the perspective of others. If this is your first time listening to this show, welcome to the porch. If you're a regular listener, you're family, and it's good to have you back. Before I go any further, I want to give a special shout out to James Phillips, who was the guest on the porch for the last episode. He was nice enough to write about Porch Matters in his column for the Daily Mountain Eagle. Thank you very much, James. I appreciate you, brother. I'm sitting back here on this porch. It's about 2 hours away from my deadline that I always upload the show at. Man, it feels great out here. The wind's not blowing. It's perfect. Why am I talking about the weather? Well, on this episode, I welcome Chris Heater to the porch. He's a truck driver, soon-to-be CBD business owner, and he's also a storm chaser. He's a part of the Midwest Storm Chasers and Researchers on Facebook. If you would, hit the pause button real quick, pull up Facebook, type in Midwest Storm Chasers and Researchers in your search bar, and give them a like and a follow. If you're into storm chasing, this is your episode. I really hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Without further ado, let's get started. Chris Heater, welcome to the porch, my friend. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Any better? I don't guess I could stand it. Sitting out here on this back porch, I'm actually fixing to have to break out my sunglasses. It sure is nice to see that orange ball of flame in the air.
It's about time. I think we went through about 2 weeks of absolute hell, and then now it feels like we have this huge heat wave going on, and it's only 50 degrees.
Oh, I'm loving it. That's what I was telling my last guest. You know, I'm 6'7", 400 pounds, and I'm very hot natured. So anytime you see this fat boy break out a coat, it's cold.
Yeah, it's cold.
Fat boy got cold a couple of weeks ago, telling you.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see that sun come out. It's nice and warm out here. I'm actually able to wear shorts again. It's great.
Yeah, it's felt nice. I mean, I enjoy parts of winter, but when it starts getting 10, 15, 20 below, it's like, okay, I've had enough of it. Where's spring at?
Right. Yeah, I like warmer weather. I like fall because of football. I live in the South, so SEC football is king.
Yep, that's king.
And, you know, then once that's over, now I'm ready for summer to come back, to be honest with you. I like the snow. I like the colder weather, but I like it on the side of the road. I drive a truck, so I don't really like it being on the road. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. I'm right there with you there. I'm a truck driver as well, so, you know, I like looking at the snow. I don't like driving on it.
No, me either. How long you been on the road?
I've been doing it. This will be my 5th year at it. I started in October of 2016. Started out with rail transport to get my CDL, and ever since then, I've pretty much been over the road.
What kind of process was it for you to go get your CDL through them?
It actually was pretty easy. You know, I filled out the application and expressed interest in their school program. And, you know, once they do like the background checks and, you know, drug tests and everything, they kind of explain what it entailed. And at that time, I don't know if they've made any changes since it's been, you know, several years since I've done it, but they paid me just $500 a week while I was at school, and they provided breakfast and lunch. Suppers were on your own. Was there for about 4 weeks. That first week was just getting used to driving around their track on Fox Valley Technical College, and did that for about a week, and then they started getting you out onto the road and doing the driving training on the road and getting used to shifting and everything. So, you know, compared to other programs I've heard drivers since then talk about them, I think I gave myself a really good start doing it the way that I did.
From the way it sounds, I know there's some of these companies out here that's only paying about like what you're saying, about $500 for a week. Some of them are less. Then they'll go through their training, and then they'll stick them inside of a truck with somebody else to teach them how to do things out there for a few weeks, and then cut them loose.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of how it was for the most part. I mean, during the schooling, you know, they paid me $500 a week while I was at school, and then you know you have to pass your CDL tests. You got your CDL, and then that's when you went home for, depending on when they could get a driver trainer to you, anywhere from 3 to 7 days at home. And of course, at that point, you already been away for about a month. So you're ready to go home for a little bit, and then they get a driver trainer sent over to you, and you did that. Depending on how well you did with a trainer on the road, you know, I only did it for about 2 weeks before they cut me loose and got me my own truck. But you know, they can take up to a month to do that part.
Right. Yeah, my story on getting my CDL is kind of funny. My dad was an owner operator. I'd been around it all my life, and he did his absolute best to keep me out of a truck. I got my Class B CDLs back in 04, 05. I was going to originally get my A's, but he was there again, just trying to talk me out of it. You don't need no Class A's, boy. You know, and you know, that was one time that I wished I hadn't listened to my dad, because I ended up getting my Class B's. I drove a tandem dump, drove a triaxle dump some, and then I ended up getting laid off because at the time I wasn't doing nothing but hauling coal down here. Back in the day, coal was huge, and then you know it went away whenever Drummond Coal Company figured out that they could contract out their mineral rights.
Yep.
And then every time the price of coal would go up, you'd see all kinds of pits pop up. But then as soon as the price would go back down, they'd go away. Well, my job went away, and then I ended up going to work at the sheriff's department, being a corrections officer, because I needed a job. Flash forward 10 years, I'm ready to get out of there. So I went to driving school over at a little community college right up the road, Bevel State, and went through their 6-week course. I basically had to relearn everything. Not that I had forgotten it, but the way I was taught to drive back in the day wasn't the way that they were teaching you how to pass your test over here. I had to learn the art of double clutching.
Yep. That's exactly what they did for us too, was that double clutch.
Yeah. I grew up old school floating. You know, we didn't touch that clutch unless we were starting or stopping.
Yep.
So, you know, whenever they started teaching me how to double clutch, the instructor was getting on to me pretty much every time I'd get behind the wheel, because I see you floating over there. I see you floating. You better quit that. You ain't gonna pass.
Yeah, I was like, they told me during school that, hey, you know, during school you have to double clutch. You have to double clutch for your CDL test.
Right.
After that, float the gears all you want, but you just cannot float the gears when you are with that CDL tester.
Yeah. They don't care how you do it as long as you pass. After you pass, you can do whatever you want to.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
How do you enjoy being out on the road?
Overall, it's been enjoyable. I haven't always been, you know, truck driving all those years. Part of it was being an independent contractor with a RV transport company. So I got to see practically the entire United States, the lower 48. The only 2 states I have left to cross off my list at this point is Alaska and Hawaii, which hopefully I get to do soon.
Alaska is a must, but I've seen it from a cruise ship. I hadn't seen it from a truck. I've seen it from a cruise ship. We
Yeah, I
had,
don't think I'd want to do it from a truck.
oh, it's absolutely wonderful up there, man.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I, I know our listeners can't see this face, but you can, so I'll go ahead and share it. I spent the entire time just like this.
I can imagine. I've seen the
Just
pictures, and I know pictures just don't do it justice.
it don't. It don't. It's absolutely breathtaking. I had what I call post vacation depression for 3 months after I got back from Alaska. I did not want to leave. I'll be honest with you. It was gorgeous.
Yeah,
Now
I,
I sure by the time wintertime rolled around, I'd been really good.
yep.
Really
You'd be
ready
like,
to
okay,
leave.
I'm ready to get out of here.
Yeah.
I'm done with Alaska.
I'm tired of shoveling snow.
I don't even. I constantly see like weather forecasts in the winter up there, even for like Fairbanks or Anchorage, and it's just constantly 20, 30 below. And I'm like, yeah, Alaska would be nice in the summer, but I'll steer away from it with a 10-foot pole in the wintertime.
I've actually got a very close friend. Her name is Angela. Her and her husband was stationed up there. And I actually asked her, shout out to you, Angela, if you're listening to this. I actually asked her what it was like to live in below freezing. And if my memory serves me correctly, she said something to the extent of once it gets below zero, it don't really matter what the number is.
I don't disagree with that. Once it gets below zero, you don't really feel a difference. It's just, how quick do you get frostbite? That's pretty much the only difference.
Right. What's your end goals? You planning on sticking with trucking for a while, or have you got an exit strategy? Because there's some people that's not lifers, and there's some people that are.
Yeah, I mean, of course, when I first started at it, I was a single guy, and I was like, I can do this my whole life. I enjoy this. It was fun to, travel around the country, be somewhere different every day. I didn't really need to be home, but then I had to go and find myself a woman, got married, and now I have a 18-month-old at home. I drive locally now, but it's still really, really long hours. I mean, just this past week, I worked for FedEx pulling the double trailers. And, of course, I signed up for it. I agreed it. I was covering someone else's dedicated run. And in a 7-day period, which, our pay periods go from like Saturday to Friday.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take like Saturday to Saturday, I ended up driving 4,500 miles. And that just kind of, I've been forming kind of an exit strategy. I don't want to do trucking anymore my whole life. I'm actually working on forming my own CBD business and getting that ball rolling. So, and my end goal is to get out of trucking and focus strictly on that in the future.
That's interesting. What led you to the CBD business?
Well, in a really roundabout way, the pandemic actually led me to it. My wife is an optician, and when the pandemic got going, she was furloughed for the first couple of months. And then last May, she was basically told by her company, hey, we're reopening. We need you to come back to work. But the problem was all the daycares were either jam-packed full of kids that were already in the program and they had just reopened, and the one daycare that we were relying on closed permanently. So she didn't have childcare. I had to keep working full time, and just with the stress of everything, she had to stay home and become basically overnight have to become a stay-at-home mom. And at that point, we weren't worried about drug tests or anything like that. So she started taking the CBD products, mostly in the form of like the ingestibles, like gummies and stuff like that.
Right.
And seeing how much it helped her with her anxiety and stress level, started getting my wheels turning. I started doing some more research on it, and I just, as the months have gone on and I've researched this, I got more and more interested in it, and it's turned into like a passion of mine at this point.
CBD and the subject of marijuana is very interesting to me.
Oh yeah,
I'm I'm all for it being decriminalized. If they want to legalize it, great.
yep.
Um,
And,
the only the only concern that I have about marijuana usage, period, is the long term effects. Hey, you said you've done research on it. What are some of the symptoms of long term usage?
well, actually, the part that I'm dealing with, and that's kind of like a misconception that the industry in general is trying to fight against. Um, there's a difference between because like the CBD, I'm working on, uh, partnering with a company sells it with no THC in it, which is THC is obviously what gets you high.
Right,
A lot of people don't want that high, but they want the benefits of the cannabis plant. Or in this case, I'll be working on the hemp side.
right,
Um, but there's still just a misconception in general that, um, the second you say CBD, they automatically think, oh, that's going to get you high.
right,
Well, if you get a CBD with no THC in it, you're not going to get high, but you're going to get the health benefits. So, um, as for, I mean, I have friends that are long term marijuana users. They don't, it's not like they're doing it every day, but at least once a week. And actually, I have one down in Oklahoma that grows marijuana legally for the state dispensaries. Um, at least in the research that I've found, um, for long-term marijuana users, I haven't seen too much in the way of long-term effects. Um, Again, that's just more I have to research. It's still kind of a newer, evolving industry, and there's still a lot that we don't know.
right,
It's kind of the same with like the medical use CBD,
right,
where you have no THC in it. I can't like when I develop my website, U.S. law states that I cannot make a medical claim on the CBD. I can say, here's what it can be used for, but we can't guarantee it's going to cure this or make this better. I can't jump on the website and say, hey, this cures or alleviates stress or this cures cancer. I can't make any medical claims like that
right,
because there's just a lot. There's a lot of medical research going into it, and I think that's why we're pushing towards, you know, back in 2018 when it was the Farm Bill was updated and they removed hemp from the criminalization list. They made it where you can legally have hemp. Uh, that kind of set the ball in motion for this industry, and I think as more people get into it, the more they realize the health benefits, whether the government tells them or not that there's health benefits.
right. And I'm all for it. I've done a little bit of research about it. I know that there's been several cases of marijuana actually being able to help somebody fight cancer, not just with their appetite, but actually be able to fight the actual cancer itself. I know it's great
Yep.
for seizures. Multiple documented evidence shows that, you know, marijuana usage for that calms and alleviates seizure symptoms and everything like that. I'm all for it. I don't.
I'm 100% for it as well. Because I mean, she's not. My wife isn't using those stuff that has the THC in it. It's
Right.
just regular CBD oil. But obviously, when someone can see the improvement that it makes right in front of your eyes, you kind of become a believer. And
Right.
my wife, as I'm working on starting this business, my wife thinks I'm borderline obsessed with it, but it's like I've always had an obsession with helping people. And I know like truck driving, I went into truck driving because I knew that helped people. I mean, the pandemic proved that. And in so many natural disasters, it's proved that. But I want to be more hands-on with the helping, which is why I started focusing a few months ago on this CBD industry and looking at what I needed to do. And the more research I do, the more obsessed I get with it.
I wouldn't use the word obsessed. I would use the word passionate.
There we go. That's a good way to
You're
put it.
you're you're
Very
not
passionate.
you're not obsessed with it, my friend. You're passionate about it.
Yep.
Yeah, just I kindly get accused of being obsessed with this podcast. I'm not obsessed with it. I'm passionate about
Yeah,
it.
passionate about it. And that's passion is what makes the world turn round.
Absolutely. So, how's the weather where you're at?
It's warm. It's about 60 degrees, but it's been overcast. We don't have that orange ball in the sky today. It's overcast and off and on rain, but it's not too bad. Not too bad.
Yeah, the wind's a little bit high up here on the porch. It sounds like there's a tornado blowing in. If it comes through on this recording, folks, I really do apologize. But that's one of the risks you take by recording outside. But the reason why I brought that up is my friend Mr. Heater here. He pays real close attention to the weather. He is a part
Absolutely.
of the Midwest Storm Chasers and Researchers. Chris, how did you become passionate? I'm not going to use that word obsessed. I'm going to use the word passionate. How did you become passionate about weather?
It's kind of a funny story. My dad, back in the 70s, was a county ESDA storm spotter, directly for the emergency management. So it kind of came from him. I used to be when I was a little kid, I used to be absolutely terrified of storms. I had this little curiosity in me, but anytime there was a tornado warning or risk of a tornado, I would constantly, especially if I knew there was a tornado warning where we were and I heard the sirens, I'd start crying. But back in, I always forget the actual date just because I was so young, but back in 1996, the town that I live in, Urbana, Illinois, I was at home with my sisters. My mom was waiting at the high school for my older sisters coming back from a field trip. Well, they got held up in Tuscola, Illinois, because there was a tornado that had touched down just southwest of Urbana and was going through the southeast side of town. Now, when it went through the southeast side of town, it was rated an F3. That tornado, we lived about a mile and a half east of town, and I remember my sister and dad and I being in the basement, and we were listening to the police scanner, and a sheriff's officer goes, tornado in progress at Washington and Route 130. My dad hears that, knows that that's about a mile and a half away from us, and he goes running, barreling up the stores. He just tells us, he goes, if there's a tornado about to take the house, I'm going to see it. So he goes running up. He looked towards the west, and and of course at this point it was dark out, and a lightning bolt flashed, and it wasn't the tornado itself. It actually wound up being the satellite funnel that was over the neighbor's house. And so he came running back, got down to the basement again with us, and he told us, he goes, it's about to hit us. Be prepared. Even though I was so young, I remember my ears popping. Ever since then, I started getting to the point where I was no longer scared of them. Now it was curiosity. And I think with my extended family being directly impacted by that tornado, because it went on to hit Ogden as an F4, their house sustained quite a bit of damage, and then anything east of them was leveled. So I think kind of as bad as it sounds, the obsession or the passion came from family being directly impacted and myself being able to feel the effect of a funnel or tornado and eventually leading into all of this.
Do you call yourself a storm chaser by chance?
Yeah, I would consider myself a storm chaser. I'm not one of those, I tried spotting for the first year or so when I was old enough to drive, and that wasn't fulfilling it enough And that's when I was like, okay, I'm not going to spot anymore. I'm actually going to go out chasing.
What's the difference for those people that are listening right now that don't really know the difference?
So storm spotter, they can either just be, storm spotting themselves, or they could actually be working for the local emergency management. If they work for a local emergency management, so like here it's called ESDA, they would, if there's severe weather expected, they would call you up, and then they would tell you what part of the county that you sit in and you don't move from, and you keep an eye on the weather. Storm chasers, they're not bound by being told where to go. You're doing your own forecasting. You'll be obviously leaving the county, if you really want to. I mean, you could technically do storm chasing, but if you're actively moving, that's when you're a chaser. But if you're just sitting in one spot, either under your own power or because you work for a local EMA, that's a spotter.
What kind of training's involved?
The National Weather Service holds spring storm spotter trainings. I always tell people that gives you like the very basic kind of knowledge on storms and stuff like that. A lot of my knowledge just came from studying computer models myself, interacting with other people who are well-known storm chasers, and then really just kind of getting out and learning myself. I can tell you right now, it's not for the faint of heart if you want to actually go out and storm chase, especially if you start getting into like a big tornado outbreak day. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've had some close calls, but really the best way to do it is just doing it yourself and hands-on experience, and just learn from your mistakes and understand that sometimes those mistakes can put you in a pretty precarious situation and can end up getting you killed.
Whenever somebody thinks about storm chaser, if they're old enough to remember, they automatically think Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt in the movie Twister.
Oh, that was my favorite movie growing up.
It's one of mine too. I too am fascinated by the weather, and
Oh yeah,
I just like you. I grew up and I was scared of it for a little while. As soon as I seen a dark cloud, oh Lord, I got scared. But then as
yep.
I got older, I became fascinated by it, and I'm called crazy to this day because I still, on my bucket list, I want to go down south whenever there's a hurricane coming in the Gulf, and I want to have a hurricane party.
Yep. They love the hurricane parties down there.
Oh yes, and I've seen several tornadoes on the ground and everything like that, and I find weather just absolutely fascinating. It's just one of Mother Nature's and the good Lord's many miracles. You know what I mean?
I agree with that. And like, I've been actively chasing since 2008. Some years are better than others, but I can tell you this, that if you think you know everything about chasing, then you just need to quit, because even though I've been doing it for quite a while, I haven't been doing it as long as a bunch of others, but even the ones that have been doing it for 30 years, they all say the same thing. Every chase is different. Every storm system is different. There's always something to learn, just because there's so much we don't know. I'm hoping in my lifetime, I think there's a lot of really cool research happening that actually some of my friends are doing. And I think their research and conclusive evidence, I think, will eventually lead to much longer warning times and actually a bit of a predictive factor to tornadoes ahead of time.
What's the average time on a warning right now for tornadoes?
Yeah, average warning time, last that I checked, I think the statistics last year showed it was about a 14-minute warning time, which, I mean, that doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to what it was back in, say for the 70s, where you were lucky to get even a minute warning,
Right.
We've come a really long way.
Right. Definitely. With radar and everything else being more as sophisticated as it is today, there's no telling where it'll be in 5 years.
Yep. And I think there's some really cool research coming. Like some of the research that my friends are doing scientifically, they actually have probes that have infrasonic sensors on them. And I've seen some of his research so far and some of the tornadoes that he's got. I've always been under the assumption that there had to be some sort of sound signature happening before a tornado occurs, because there's a lot of cases of animals reacting to a tornado well in advance of any sort of warning we can give ourselves. Sure enough, they're finding that like the type of tornado and strength of tornado will go hand in hand with the sound signature that it makes. And they've been able to show that sound signature up to 2 hours in advance of the tornado actually developing.
Well, as the wind picks up here a little bit more, and I feel like I need to be Bill Paxton out there on the side of the road dropping sand, can you describe the different types of sound signatures that you'd be looking for?
And of course, these are all sound signatures that humans can't hear. It's below our level of hearing.
Okay.
Which explains why animals are the ones that picked up on it. The craziest one was actually kind of accidental research back during the super outbreak of 2011 that went through like Tuscaloosa. That was the big one.
That was one
Birmingham
of the
was it.
That was one of the ones that I saw go across.
Oh, really?
That big monster. Yes.
Yeah.
It came across about 5 miles, 6 miles or so from where I was.
Oh, wow.
So yeah,
that had to be pretty scary.
It was. It was God's thumbnail, brother.
Oh, it really, yeah. The tornadoes that violent, I always call them God's thumb. It just wipes everything out in its path. So,
no.
It was kind of inadvertent research, but I think it kind of goes hand in hand with my friend's research that there was a migratory bird that scientists were tracking their migration over time.
Right.
And they went to track down some of those birds the day of the outbreak. Could not find any of them. They were all gone. Well, they have trackers on those birds. So they pulled up the tracker data and they found out that the night before the tornado outbreak occurred, all of those birds fled to the Gulf Coast. And then about 12 hours after the tornado outbreak, the birds returned to their normal nesting area. And it kind of started leading, there was kind of undeniable evidence that for some reason those birds fled to the Gulf Coast well in advance. And of course, at this point, people had warning that there was a tornado outbreak likely, but those birds knew that something was happening and they fled.
So a good warning sign for anybody that's listening right now is anytime you see animals start to go crazy, pay attention to the weather.
Yep. And I've seen that time and time again, even an hour before I've seen, I'll be out ahead of a tornadic supercell and it's been producing tornadoes, and, I'll be sitting in areas where that there should be birds, but an hour in advance of the tornado, you don't hear any of them because they've either fled the area or they've fallen silent because they know what's coming.
Right. What's some of your best memories of chasing storms?
Honestly, other than just the camaraderie and really close friends I've made, I'd have to say one of the most memorable chases was back in 2016, Canadian Texas. Was expecting tornadoes, wasn't expecting anything huge. This particular storm that we were actually tracking along with, we could have just been considered storm spotters, because in the 4 tornadoes that storm produced, the storm was stationary the entire time for about 3 hours. And all of those tornadoes were within a mile of the small town of Canadian, Texas. So we were kind of on the west side of Canadian, looking towards the north and northwest, and just over a span of about 3 hours, the storm just stayed in the same exact spot. And
It didn't move at
there was
all.
one, yeah, it didn't even move one bit, not even a mile. It's just these tornadoes. The first one was the biggest one. It was on the ground for almost a half an hour. But in that half an hour time, it moved, I think, about a mile and a half to the east, and then shifted direction and followed its exact track back to the west, and it dissipated. Just
How is that scientifically possible for that storm not to move but yet produce tornadoes? Because I know just enough to get me past ignorant to the stupid stage, or vice versa. I know that it takes wind and everything moving fast coming into slow to be able to produce the spin. So if there's no wind, or if the storm's not moving, there's no wind. How is it? How does it produce?
Yeah, obviously it's a pretty rare occasion to literally have a storm sit there for so long producing tornadoes. The big reason behind that was the steering winds, which are really high up, were extremely weak. So storm motions weren't expected to be all that fast anyways. They were expecting storm motions to be around like 10, 15 miles an hour, which is pretty slow for a storm. In this particular case, if my memory serves me right, on top of the really weak steering winds for the storm, the storm had also latched onto a surface boundary. And when it latched onto that boundary, the boundary wasn't moving, and with the coincidence of the steering winds being very weak, it literally just stayed right on that boundary and didn't move until eventually there was enough cold air from all of the rain that had been falling for several hours that it finally started to push the storm and the frontal boundary into motion, and it followed all along with, which also ended the tornado threat as well.
Do you and your team just chase tornadoes, or do you spot and report for other weather activity?
Oh yeah, we do weather activity. I've chased a few blizzards. I chased a big one back in 2017 up in Chicago. I've done some blizzards over in Nebraska. I haven't gotten too much into the hurricane side of things. I've done one hurricane before, would have been Irene, and I think that was back in 2011, if I remember correctly.
Somewhere
it's been
around
so
in
long,
there,
it's
yeah.
hard to remember everything.
Oh, there's been a ton of them.
They were, yeah. And I've actually have extended family, an uncle, aunt, and cousin that live down in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And they nearly died in Hurricane Katrina. So it's like, it is on my bucket list. It's not something that I'm like, super passionate. I want to go get, but it's something on my bucket list to experience at least once in my life, that stadium effect where you have a strong landfalling hurricane during the daylight and a clear eye. So then when you're in that eye, you can look around and it's just a ring of eye wall around you. And it's, something like I would love to see that once in my life. And then after I see that, I'm good. I don't need to do it anymore.
I can't remember the year, but it was the year that the Republican National Convention was down in Tampa, Florida. And there was a hurricane that was coming up into the Gulf, and very rarely, because you don't see it that often, but it was coming up the western edge of Florida. Do you remember that hurricane?
I believe I do, yeah.
I was in the closest thing to a hurricane party that I've ever experienced in my life was I happened to be in the Tampa, Clearwater, Lakeland area at that time, and I was out on the pier down there in Clearwater as it was going by. And then as I was going home, I had to go up and then cut back across 10, go toward Mobile, where it ended up making landfall up around in that area. So that was, like I said, I haven't experienced a hurricane party yet, but that was the closest thing to one that I've had.
Yeah, I say there's a lot of storm chasers that chase hurricanes as well, and we kind of have our own version of a hurricane party. We typically, get together in about, groups of 5 to 10, and get to experience it with, everyone together. So I guess we kind of have our own versions of hurricane parties ourselves.
There you go. Well, Chris, I appreciate you coming on to the show. How can our listeners keep in touch with you and everything that you're doing?
Yeah, you can either, I have a Facebook group, which is labeled Midwest Storm Chasers and Researchers. And then I also have a Facebook page, Midwest Storm Chasers and Researchers. And then actually, I believe if you search the same thing on YouTube, I think I have it set up correctly. You could also see all of my storm chasing video throughout the years on YouTube as well.
I'll be sure to do that. Chris, I thank you very much for coming on the show. You're always welcome on this porch anytime.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
That's all the time we have for this episode. Please like the page and join the group on Facebook at Porch Matters Podcast. Please subscribe or follow us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or the platform of your choice so you don't miss an episode. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please rate the show and leave us a review if you have the time. Thank you very much for listening, and catch us next time right here on Porch Matters.